What if the story of Job was never mainly about suffering? Most people hear Job's name and immediately think of pain, loss, tragedy, endless questions with no answers. Maybe that's why so many people avoid the book completely. It feels heavy, uncomfortable, too close to home. But what if we misunderstood the story from the beginning? Because Job is not just a man sitting in ashes asking God why bad things happen. Hidden underneath the suffering is a much deeper message, one that changes how we see faith, fear, trust, and even our relationship with God. And honestly, this matters more than most people realize, because there comes a moment in life when faith stops feeling simple. A prayer goes unanswered, a relationship breaks apart, anxiety grows louder at night, the future suddenly looks uncertain. And deep inside, a terrifying question begins to rise. If God is good, then why is this happening? Job asked that question too. At first glance, his life looked perfect. He was respected, wealthy, faithful, devoted to God. Scripture even describes him as blameless and upright. Not perfect, but sincere. He genuinely feared God and avoided evil. Then everything collapsed. His children died. His wealth disappeared. His body became covered in painful sores. Even the people closest to him stopped understanding him. In a matter of moments, the man who once had everything sat alone in grief so deep that words could barely hold it. And maybe that's why this story feels personal. Because many people know what it's like to lose something they thought would always stay. Stability, peace, confidence, someone they loved. But here's the detail many overlook. Before Job ever spoke a word, before his friends argued with him, before the suffering even began, there was a conversation happening in heaven, and that conversation reveals the real point of the story. Satan claimed that Job only loved God because his life was blessed. In other words, his faith was transactional. Remove the comfort, remove the protection, remove the rewards, and Job would walk away. That accusation wasn't only about Job, it was about humanity itself. Do people truly love God, or only the benefits he gives? By the end of this video, that question may hit closer to home than expected, because the story of Job is not mainly about pain. It's about whether faith can survive when life no longer makes sense. One of the hardest moments in spiritual life happens when obedience no longer seems to work. Most people never say it out loud, but many quietly believe following God should create a safer life. Not perfect, maybe, but manageable, predictable, protected. Job probably believed that too, not in a selfish way. He genuinely honored God. He prayed regularly. He even offered sacrifices for his children, just in case they had sinned in secret. Job cared deeply about righteousness, yet suffering still arrived, and that shattered the belief that good behavior automatically guarantees comfort. That's where the story becomes dangerous, because it confronts something hidden inside the human heart. Many people don't just want God, they want certainty, control, assurance that life will go according to plan. But faith built only on outcomes cannot survive loss. The moment life breaks apart, transactional faith begins to collapse. That's exactly what happened to Job's friends. When they arrived, they sat silently with him for 7 days. At first, their grief was compassionate, but eventually, they became determined to explain his suffering. There must be a reason. You must have sinned. God wouldn't allow this otherwise. And honestly, people still say similar things today. When someone struggles, others search for a formula. Maybe their faith was weak. Maybe they made the wrong choices. Maybe God is punishing them. But the book of Job dismantles that thinking piece by piece. Because sometimes suffering is not punishment. Sometimes it's the collision between human understanding and a reality too large to fully grasp. Job desperately wanted answers. He questioned. He mourned. He cried out in confusion. Yet something remarkable happened in the middle of his pain. He refused to completely let go of God. Broken? Yes. Angry? Sometimes. Confused? Absolutely. But underneath all of it, a fragile thread of trust remained alive. That's important because real faith is not emotionless certainty. It's holding on to God while standing in the middle of questions that remain unresolved. And maybe someone listening right now understands that feeling deeply. Praying while exhausted, worshiping while afraid, trying to trust God while silently wondering where He is. If that's where life feels right now, Job's story is not condemning that struggle. It's revealing that faith can still exist inside confusion. Not polished faith, not easy faith, but honest faith. And strangely enough, honest faith may be the kind God values most. One of the most painful parts of Job's story is not the loss. It's the silence. For chapter after chapter, Job speaks. His friends speak. Arguments grow louder. Emotions become raw. Everyone tries to explain suffering through human logic, but God remains quiet. That silence can feel unbearable, because sometimes the hardest thing is not pain itself. It's feeling abandoned inside the pain. Many people can endure struggle if they know why it's happening. But uncertainty creates a different kind of suffering, and Job lived there for a long time. He searched for answers that never came. He wanted a courtroom conversation with God. He wanted explanations, clarity, resolution. Instead, heaven stayed silent. And maybe that's the part modern believers understand most. There are seasons when prayers feel like they hit the ceiling, moments when life becomes confusing and God seems distant. Not absent necessarily, just quiet. That silence often creates two temptations. The first is bitterness. The second is performance. Some people become angry with God and walk away completely. Others become obsessed with trying to earn His attention, believing enough effort will force heaven to respond. But Job eventually discovered something unexpected. God was present even when he seemed silent. Near the end of the story, God finally speaks out of a whirlwind. Yet he doesn't give Job the detailed explanation he wanted. Instead, he asks questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Can you command the morning? Do you understand the depths of creation? At first, that response almost sounds harsh. But something deeper is happening. God is not humiliating Job. He is revealing the limits of human perspective. Job had been trying to understand eternal purposes using temporary vision. And honestly, so do we. Human beings desperately want life to make immediate sense. But sometimes the full picture is larger than what human understanding can currently hold. That realization changed Job completely. Not because every question was answered, but because he encountered God himself. And sometimes presence changes a person more than explanations ever could. Right now, there may be someone carrying disappointment they cannot explain, a prayer unanswered for years, a wound nobody sees, a fear hidden behind smiles. Don't miss this moment. The silence of God is not always the absence of God. Sometimes He is doing something deeper than immediate relief. And if this message is speaking to something personal in your life, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone walking through a difficult season. You never know who needs this reminder to. Near the end of the book, Job says something extraordinary. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. That single sentence changes everything. Before suffering, Job knew about God. After suffering, he knew God personally. There's a difference. Many people build their faith through information alone. Sermons, verses, podcasts, Christian content. None of those things are bad. They matter deeply. But information can only take someone so far. At some point, faith becomes personal. And strangely, that transformation often happens in seasons nobody would willingly choose. Pain has a way of exposing what success hides. It reveals fears buried underneath confidence, attachments disguised as security, expectations placed on God without realizing it. Job entered suffering believing righteousness guaranteed stability. He left suffering realizing God himself was the treasure, not merely the blessings surrounding life. That is the deeper revelation inside this story. The goal was never simply restoring Job's comfort. It was transforming his understanding of God. And honestly, many people listening may be in that exact process right now without realizing it. The loss hurt. The confusion still hurts. But somewhere inside the struggle, faith is becoming more real than before. Not shallow optimism, not religious performance. Something deeper, something honest. The kind of faith that survives uncertainty because it is rooted in God's character rather than temporary circumstances. That changes how someone lives, because when faith depends entirely on visible blessings, fear controls everything. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of disappointment. But when trust becomes rooted in who God is, even painful seasons lose the power to completely destroy hope. That doesn't mean emotions disappear. Job still grieved deeply. Tears are not weakness. Questions are not rebellion. Even Jesus wept. Yet underneath the sorrow, something stronger began forming. trust beyond understanding. And maybe that's the invitation hidden inside Job's story, not to pretend suffering feels good, not to deny pain, but to discover that God can still be trusted even when life becomes difficult to explain. That realization has carried believers through prisons, grief, betrayal, loneliness, and impossible seasons for generations. Because faith is not proven when everything feels easy. Faith becomes real when someone continues walking with God through the dark. Many people think Job's story ends with restoration. God gives him more children, more wealth, longer life. And while that part matters, it's not the main conclusion. Because restored blessings could never erase the pain Job experienced. The children he lost were still gone. The grief had still happened. The scars remained part of his story. So why does restoration appear at the end? Because the book is showing something powerful. Suffering was never the final word. That matters deeply for anyone who feels trapped in hopelessness. Some people watching may secretly believe their story has already been ruined. Too many mistakes. Too much disappointment. Too much damage. But Job's story pushes against that despair, not by promising an easy life, but by revealing that God still works in broken places. And notice something important. When God finally responds to Job's friends, he rebukes them. Why? Because they spoke about him inaccurately. They reduced God into simple formulas and predictable systems. Job, despite his confusion, spoke honestly. That detail is comforting. God is not looking for fake perfection. He desires relationship, real relationship, the kind where someone can cry, question, wrestle, and still remain open to him. That changes how prayer feels. Suddenly faith is no longer pretending everything is okay. It becomes bringing real emotions before God instead of hiding them behind religious language. Job teaches people that God is big enough for honest conversations. And maybe that's exactly what someone needs to hear tonight. You do not have to clean up every emotion before approaching God. Bring the fear, bring the anger, bring the exhaustion, bring the confusion. Because the story of Job is ultimately about a relationship that endured when everything else collapsed. And honestly, that may be the greatest miracle in the entire book. Not restored wealth, not physical healing, but a faith that survived devastation. A faith refined by fire instead of destroyed by it. So here's the deeper truth hidden inside Job's story. Suffering was never the destination. It was the place where shallow faith died and deeper trust was born. And maybe that process is happening in your life too, quietly, painfully, but powerfully. So if life feels confusing right now, don't assume God has abandoned your story. Some of the deepest spiritual transformation happens in seasons that make the least sense at first. One day, what feels like silence may reveal itself as preparation. One day, what feels broken may become part of a testimony that helps someone else survive. And one day, like Job, you may realize the greatest gift was not getting every answer. It was discovering God was still there the entire time. If this video spoke to your heart, comment with the word endure, not as a performance. It's a reminder that faith can survive hard seasons. And if someone you love is carrying silent pain, share this message with them.